Welcome, everybody, to Real News. We begin tonight with the ongoing immigration debate. Today, senators considered the first of many amendments to the Gang of Eights bill. A couple of them aimed to make heightened border security a precondition for granting legal status to the estimated 11 million illegals already here. Essie, how'd it go today?
Well, yeah, we've talked about immigration reform and border security as it's important to conservatives and Republicans. And the idea that we'd invoke some triggers in the legislation so that border security has to happen in order for the legalization process to continue. Well, those triggers, two of them anyway, had a bad day in the Senate. They were both voted down. We can show you what they were. The first was proposed 700-mile double-layer border fence. That was proposed by Senator John Thune. That was voted down. The second was a biometric visa system that was to be in place before the legalization process started. That was proposed by David Vitter. Both were voted down mostly along party lines, and both sides in the Gang of Eight, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, voted no on both of those propositions. Now, lest you think this is somehow somehow portends the way the American public feels about border security, and they think, well, who needs it? That's actually not true. Most of the American public, a majority, a clear majority, in fact, we can put those numbers up on the screen, show that border security is the thing most Americans want the president and the administration and Congress to focus on when crafting immigration legislation. So it is important, and therefore Congress better hope that they can work this out because it is something that not only Republicans want, but the public wants as well. Now, there's another proposed trigger. If you remember a while back, John Cornyn had a proposed amendment that was going to hold up immigration legislation with a whole bunch of what some people called weak benchmarks on border security, sort of stuff that you couldn't pinpoint, non-specified. Well, that was not completely popular. There's a new amendment, the Hoeven-Corker Amendment, which aims to do the same thing but is much more specific. It lays out all the kinds of things that the legislation would have to accomplish, and so that Republicans and everyone else know what they can expect, what's being promised. Senator John Hoeven had this to say about that legislation. It's different from Cornyn's in that we actually put the plan right in the legislation. We're spelling out all the technologies, drones, Vader, sensors, towers, helicopters. It's sector by sector the things that the Border Patrol wants. Is that going to satisfy everyone? Let's ask one person and find out. Joining us tonight is Utah Senator Mike Lee. He's the author of Why John Roberts Was Wrong About Health Care, a conservative critique of the Supreme Court's Obamacare ruling. Senator Lee, I think from the title I have some idea of what the book is about, but let me start with you on immigration. Let me get your reaction to those 2 amendments today that were voted down in the Senate.
Well, I'm not sure which amendments you're more concerned about, but if you're thinking about the Thune Amendment, for example,
right,
dealing with additional border fencing, that was voted down, as was the
Vitter
other
Amendment.
one that would have, the Vitter Amendment that would have required the entry-exit system to be complete,
right,
as a condition precedent for opening the RPI period, the legalization process for illegal aliens. So both of these were voted down by a body in the Senate that just doesn't want border security, apparently. It doesn't want anything standing in the way of legalization and eventual citizenship. And this is a big problem because, as you were pointing out just a moment ago, Essie, the American people overwhelmingly feel like anything that involves legalization of the 11 million undocumented in this country, it needs to be preceded by and be conditioned upon the prior securing of the border. And yet, so far, the Senate is walking away from that. The Senate is avoiding like the plague anything that would actually do that.
Yeah, but why, I agree with you, but why then would the 4 Republican members of the Gang of Eight also have voted against those 2 amendments?
I'm not sure you would have to ask them, but I will say this. The 4 Gang of Eight members who are Republicans have been allied, more or less, with the Democrats on this issue. In other words, even when it has been against the interests of most Republicans. They've voted with the Democrats on this because they appear to be determined to push this bill through more or less as is, and vote against and even vote to table any amendment that the Gang of Eight as a whole doesn't like to support. And I think that's a problem. And I'm very disappointed that that's the approach they've chosen to take.
You know, Senator Lee, this is Will Cain. I think SE's question is interesting. Why would the 4 Republicans have voted against these amendments? The fact that Democrats would have voted down these 2 amendments, I think your explanation is probably apropos. They just aren't concerned with border security. It's just not a priority for them. Maybe, and as far as you said, they don't want border security. But why would the 4 Republicans vote it down? I have to think the reason lies somewhere in the definition of border security. They're simply concerned that if we make the pathway to citizenship beholden to the concept of border security, then we must define it. So how do we define border security?
Right. Border security might be one of those things that's like pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And for that very reason, I proposed an amendment that would require Congress to certify border security. We could make certain requirements in statute, some of which we've already imposed, but those aren't in place yet. Once they'd been implemented, Congress would have a chance to vote on them and to say, okay, we're ready to open the legalization process. But that was voted down in committee. I'm trying to get a vote on that on the floor. Getting back to your question and to SE's original question as to why these Republicans did this, again, I normally don't speak for my colleagues and explain what was in their mindset, but one can theorize here that they're more concerned about maintaining the integrity of the original Gang of Eight proposal,
right,
and keeping the original Gang of Eight happy than they are about actually making changes that
right.
would be better for border security.
Senator Lee, Amy Holmes here. I'm really curious about the politics of this comprehensive immigration bill. It's now been proffered that the Senate needs to get 70 votes. They're shooting for 70 votes in order to then pressure the House. But what I think is interesting about that is that's a pretty high bar, and the Senate only needs 60. So if you fall short, it could be seen as a failure. Does that actually help opponents to comprehensive immigration reform as it is so far being debated?
It certainly could help opponents of this particular bill if they fall short of the 70 vote mark. And so, yeah, that's one reason why it was somewhat odd that they set it at that level. But they may well be right. If you get 70 votes or more, it tends to put some psychological pressure on the House of Representatives to move forward with something like this. But one way or another, I believe this particular bill is dead on arrival in the House of Representatives.
So, Senator Lee, do you think it's going to get to 70 votes in the Senate?
No, I don't, not at this point. And it shouldn't, because look, I'm in favor of immigration reform. We are a country of immigrants. We always have been. I hope we always will be. I'm determined to make that happen. But these things have to be done in the proper sequence. And 1,000-page bills have rarely brought us blessings in this country. 1,000-page bills usually contain something that's not terribly pleasant. And this bill is no exception. It's built on a series of false promises.